Hello and welcome to my 63rd video. In the last video we looked at the likelihood of John Milton the poet being a son of the bard and his living for a time in Wells Green, Wisterston, just 5 miles northwest of Nantwich. After the video was published on YouTube, I found out that it had been discovered 25 years earlier that Milton had indeed lived there and was published in a booklet in 1999 by the Millennium Committee of Wisterston Church and distributed to all residents of the parish. This booklet was discovered in the Nantwich Library and may be the only available extant version. The relevant pages 29 and 30 are shown in this image. I added a link to this new information with the YouTube description of the previous video immediately after I found out. It is surprising that this knowledge wasn't more widely known or even picked up by the media. Looking at the other events of 1999, we can see that there are quite a few earthquakes, as well as Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper painting being redisplayed in Milan after a gap of 22 years for its restoration. Moving on to the subject of this video, which is about the unlikely tale of the Puritan John Stubbs, and how we've been deliberately misled by the bard into believing certain historical events that almost certainly never happened. They have simply been created for dramatic effect, as well as offering subtle clues to his many aliases following his own death, that have previously been completely missed. If we look at the website shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, for example, where there is a piece called Top 18 Reasons Why Edward de Vere Oxford Was Shakespeare, we find where it states that a man with the sadly fitting name of John Stubbs had his hand cut off because he wrote that Queen Elizabeth I was too old to marry. The most obvious point, which is missed here, is that the name Stubbs is likely just a fake name created by the bard to fit the wholly invented story. So, if we dig a little deeper into this to find out who this mischievous fellow John Stubbs, the English Puritan pamphleteer, political commentator and sketch artist actually was, and even if he ever existed, we actually discover through genealogy that he was the supposed husband of Edward de Vere's cousin, Anne de Vere, the daughter of Aubrey de Vere and a brother-in-law of Bess of Hardwick. He had reputedly opposed the negotiations for marriage between Queen Elizabeth I and François, Duke of Anjou, who she supposedly referred to as her frog, a Roman Catholic who was the brother of the King of France, according to Wikipedia. And I quote, "In 1579, he, that's Stubbs, put his opinions into a pamphlet entitled The Discovery of Gaping Gulf, whereunto England is like to be swallowed by another French marriage, if the Lord forbid not the banns, by letting her Majesty see the sin and punishment thereof." Continuing, copies of the text were later publicly burned in the kitchen stove of Stationers' Hall. The pamphlet argued that at 46 years of age, Elizabeth was too old to have children and therefore had no need for marriage. He argued that English values, customs, language and morality would be undermined by so close a relationship with the French monarchy. Stubbs argued that his objective was to protect the freedom of thought and free speech that he said was associated with Protestantism. The proposed marriage could lead to a restoration of Catholic orthodoxy with its diminution of liberty. Stubbs undiplomatically described the proposed wedding as a contrary coupling, an immoral union, an uneven yoking of the clean ox to the unclean ass, a thing forbidden in the law as laid down by St. Paul, a more foul and more gross union that would draw the wrath of God of England and leave the English pressed down with the heavy loins of a worse people and beaten as with scorpions by a more vile nation. Elizabeth's court were displeased by the publication. Circulation of this pamphlet was prohibited, and Stubbs and his printer and his alleged publisher William Page, the MP for Saltash, and was supposedly secretary to Francis Russell, 2nd Earl of Bedford, who I believe to be the same as his son William and his grandson Francis. Not to be confused, of course, with Thomas Paget, the Puritan minister who married Marjorie Goldsmith of Nantwich, or his brother John Paget, rector of St Mary's in Nantwich, who was followed as pastor of the Dutch Reformed Church by Julines Herring of Wrenbury, Nantwich. They were tried at Westminster, found guilty of seditious writing and sentenced to have their right hands cut off by means of a cleaver driven through the wrist by a mallet. Initially, Queen Elizabeth had favoured the death penalty, but was persuaded by adviser John Jovey to opt for the lesser sentence. The printer was subsequently pardoned by Elizabeth, but in the case of Stubbs and his publisher, the sentence was carried out, and Stubbs' right hand was cut off on the 3rd of November 1579. At the time, Stubbs protested his loyalty to the crown, and immediately before the public dismemberment delivered a shocking pun. "Pray for me now, my calamity is at hand." His right hand having been cut off, he removed his hat with his left hand and cried, "God save the Queen," before fainting. Stubbs was subsequently imprisoned for 18 months. On being released in 1581, he continued to write, publishing, amongst other pamphlets, a reply to Cardinal Allen's defence of the English Catholics. Despite his punishment, he remained a loyal subject of Queen Elizabeth and later served in the House of Commons as MP for Great Yarmouth in the English Parliament of 1589. End of quote. He had previously been under bailiff for Great Yarmouth. Those of you who have been following my earlier videos will know that I believe that Sir Ranulph Crewe was the bard's final alias, and by an amazing coincidence just happened to be the recorder for Great Yarmouth. By another coincidence, the mathematician Edward Wright had allegedly been born in Garveston, East Dereham, which is just 4 miles south of Great Yarmouth. He had also attended Cowes and Gonville College, just like Thomas Paget, the 3rd Baron Paget. By a further coincidence, the Nantwich-based poet Geoffrey Whitney, who wrote the book A Choice of Emblems, also had business in Great Yarmouth. The character Falstaff in Henry IV Part 1 and The Merry Wives of Windsor is said to be based on Sir John Fastolf, whose family originated in Great Yarmouth. John Stubbs' hand was said to have been cut off with a cleaver, driven by a hammer. I believe it is more than coincidence that the co-author of the Malpas-born preacher John Dodd's works was a Robert Cleaver, and the poet Thomas Bancroft's clever puns is an allusion to John Stubbs' dismemberment. If the letter V in Cleaver's name is replaced by a U, then Robert Cleaver might become a better clue. If we now search through all the works of the bard using opensourceshakespeare.org, using all the keywords John, Stubb, right, hand and sting, referring to Storpion, and even if we add extra words like sharp and steel, we produce a single match, spoken by Richard Plantagenet, the Duke of Gloucester, on line 1617 of Henry VI, Part 2, Act 3, Scene 1. I defy anyone to try to persuade me these findings are merely a coincidence, because of course the Plantagenet dynasty included Geoffrey IV, who was known as the Hammer, and Richard Plantagenet, the Duke of Gloucester. The hammer and cleaver used to allegedly cut off John Stubbs' right hand is quite clearly just an allusion to the Plantagenet rule, and John Dodd of Malpas's imaginary co-author. My last video received significantly more views than the previous videos, and I want to thank everyone who watched it and appreciated the findings. There are many hard and fast Stratfordians who prefer to keep blinkers on. Please show them how wrong they are by liking this video and subscribing to my channel, which will enable the truth to be determined and learn how our history is different from what we've been led to believe, sometimes by the bard himself. Thank you for watching. There will be many more videos like this in the near future. The only way to get a full appreciation of who the bard really was is to buy my book. It is available only on Shopify. Please scan the QR code shown with your mobile and you will have a direct link to Shopify. Thank you.